Hey guys, tonight we will drift together into a slow river city where pale mist hangs over wooden boats and worn stone steps, and every sound feels padded, distant, and soft. You are already half sinking into your pillow, eyes heavier than you admit, and honestly, you probably won't survive this whole story with your eyes still open. That is perfectly fine. That is the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you feel like sharing, you can let me know where you are listening from and what time it is there right now, like tiny lantern pins on a world map of sleepy people. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are on a small wooden boat drifting upstream, the surface of the Luo River brushed with silver, as if someone has smudged moonlight with the sleeve of a robe. The air is cool and faintly sweet, carrying the smell of damp planks, river silt, and the last curls of steam from kitchens closing along the banks. The boat rocks in an easy rhythm, a slow seesaw motion your body understands immediately, coaxing your breathing to lengthen and deepen until it matches the river's quiet pull. Your shoulders, which have been living somewhere near your ears all day, start to sink back to where they actually belong. On both sides, Luoyang leans toward the water in layered roofs and pale walls, as if the whole city is trying to eavesdrop on whatever secrets the river whispers to the night. Lanterns hang from the eaves, not blazing, just glowing in soft halos, patient and steady. Their light rests on carved beams and weathered doors, then drips down onto the water where it stretches into long orange threads that your boat glides through like a shuttle passing through a loom. You slide through strand after strand, weaving yourself quietly into the fabric of this place without needing to say a single word. Nothing here is interested in rushing. The oar, when it moves, does so without urgency, cutting a shallow arc through the water and leaving ripples that fade before you can count them. Mist drifts in low bands across the river, sliding up against the boat and curling around your ankles in a cool ribbon. It does not swallow the world, it simply softens it, taking the hard outlines off roofs and railings the way sleep takes the sharp edges off thoughts. Even your worries, those little jagged things that normally cling so tightly, start to lose their corners in the damp night air. Ahead, the outline of a stone pier grows clearer, steps dropping into the river like a careful invitation. A few figures stand there, still and unhurried, their shapes blurred by mist and lantern light. Cloth wraps their shoulders and arms, loose folds catching shadow and glimmer by turns, turning them into pieces of night carrying small suns in their hands. The boat touches the stone with the gentlest bump, more like a sigh of recognition than an arrival. Hands reach out to steady you as you stand, never tugging, just anchoring you for a heartbeat while the boat and your balance negotiate with each other. The steps are damp under your feet, textured with shallow grooves left by years of river levels sliding up and down, a quiet diary of floods and low waters carved into the rock. Water folds over the lowest stair again and again, never quite repeating the same pattern, as if even the river prefers improvisation to strict routine. Behind you, the slow current carries away any thought of going back the way you came. Forward is the only direction that matters, and even that feels optional. You step fully onto the pier, and the river settles behind you like a long exhale. The mist is thinner here, more interested in curling around ankles and lantern poles than in lying flat over the water. Your neighbors are gathered near, And even though you cannot name a single one of them, you feel that subtle, certain recognition that belongs more to places than to people. Their faces are gentle in the gold light, eyes creased from squinting into sun and smoke, and years of watching this same river behave like a very slow, very stubborn animal. They read you easily. They notice the way your shoulders still sit a little too high, how your hands hover as if waiting for the next task to appear out of nowhere. You carry that thin hum of another life inside your muscles, that leftover buzz from glowing screens and insistent messages that promised urgency and delivered exhaustion. Here, that urgency looks very small, like a shallow footprint pressed into the edge of the deep, slow river. The city's response is simple and absolute. Everything moves even slower just to prove you can survive at a gentler pace. Without needing for words, the group begins to walk, and you fall in step beside them. They take the narrow street that hugs the curve of the river, where wooden railings guard the drop and shuttered fronts of food stalls line the other side. Boats are tied along the bank, ropes looped around worn stone rings. Their hulls nudge one another with soft creaks, exchanging the last sleepy comments of the day. A few low stools remain outside closed stalls, each one holding nothing more than the faint memory of a bowl, a ladle, and a pair of tired hands that have finally gone inside to rest. As you move along the street, details gently rise out of the dimness. Water beads along the underside of roof tiles, each droplet briefly catching a pinprick of lantern light before it falls soundlessly to the stones. The scent of ginger and smoke lingers in the air like the echo of a song that just finished. Somewhere behind a wall, a single pot gives a lazy knock against its lid, then quiets, as if even the cookware has agreed to respect the bedtime mood. The Luo River keeps pace on your left, now slightly lower than the street, a band of moving silver half veiled by the last thin veils of mist. Every so often, it reveals itself clearly, showing the reflections of lanterns and roofs sliding along its surface like slow-moving constellations. Its sound is a soft mixture of gurgle, slap, and hush, an irregular watery heartbeat that threads through the night and settles somewhere behind your ribs. Compared to that pulse, the frantic tempo of your usual days feels like the strange thing, not the calm you are sinking into now. Your neighbors walk with you at a measured pace that never asks you to speed up or slow down. Their lanterns cast slack, round circles of light that move just ahead of your feet, always enough to show the next step, never so much that they erase the comforting dark. Every so often, a shoulder angles slightly to guide you around a puddle or a stray basket or a sleeping dog, and the adjustment is so gentle that you hardly notice you are being guided at all. It feels less like people leading you and more like the city itself arranging you into the right path. Each step away from the boat should, in the logical corner of your mind, make you feel more lost, yet the opposite happens. With each slow stride, something inside your chest unknots a little more, like a rope being loosened from a post. The streets seem to lean in, not to crowd you, but to recognize you, as if the city has quietly added you to its internal map. You are still far from any door you can call your own, but already under lifting mist and steady lantern light, your Luoyang neighbors are leading you homeward. The street beside the river widens into an old wharf. Stone blocks give way to long wooden platforms, dark from spray and years of bare feet. The boards are slightly warped, rising and dipping like quiet waves that answer the current below. As you step onto them, your body remembers the rocking of the boat and keeps that rhythm. Lanterns hang low from stout posts wrapped with rope, each one casting a circle of soft orange on the planks and a trembling, stretched-out reflection on the river's surface. The wharf is emptying itself slowly. There is no sudden darkness, no gate slamming, no harsh announcement that the day is over. Instead, the evening unwinds in small, patient gestures. Stalls along the planks are half closed, wooden shutters lowered partway like eyelids halfway to sleep. A tub of river clams sits in shallow water, shells just visible. A stall-keeper rinses one last handful with calm, circular movements, letting the extra water fall back in quiet splashes. A few silver fish rest on a tray, waiting to be salted. They lie still and narrow, like chips of dull moonlight, and look completely unconcerned about tomorrow. Your neighbors lead you along at a pace that has nothing to do with distance or steps. Each plank underfoot answers with its own sound, a hollow drum beat here, a soft creak there. Somewhere ahead, a rope taps lazily against a wooden post every time a tide boat shifts. The sound is tiny but steady, a kind of slow metronome for the riverfront. The air smells of spent cooking fires, faint smoke and ginger, fish scales that have already done their work, drying rope, and old wood releasing the last of the day's stored warmth into the cooling night. To your left, the Luo River moves by in a wide, dark band. Its surface is mostly smooth, only broken now and then by a late boat gliding home. Those boats move without hurry. Oars dip into the water like careful brush strokes on dark paper, leaving ripples that spread and fade before anyone cares to count them. Low bundles sit under rough cloth. A clay jar rests near a stern. The people aboard are only silhouettes against the lantern glow, bending and straightening in slow arcs. They look as much a part of the river as the stones on its bed. With every step, the pattern of the waterfront becomes clearer. Boats arrive and settle. Stalls open, fill with voices and smells, then fold back into themselves as evening deepens. People move along the boards like slow brush strokes, gathering in clusters and thinning out again, never truly hurrying. Without deciding to, you match them. Your stride shortens. Your feet land more softly. The restless beat in your chest that spent all day chasing tasks loses track of what it was chasing. It feels as if the wharf has gently taken hold of your shoulders and turned you from a sharp, buzzing line into a softer curve. Your breathing falls into step with the edge of the river. You inhale as a loop of rope hangs into view. Exhale as a boat hull rises and settles in its mooring. You inhale as lantern light pools on damp boards. Exhale as a shred of mist lifts from the river and drifts toward the rooftops. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing needs to. Each ordinary detail is its own quiet reassurance that the world knows how to cool down without your constant supervision. At the far end of the wharf, lanterns thin out and the wooden platforms narrow back into stone paths leading inland. Your neighbors angle gently away from the water. The river stays beside you as a broad band of dark silver, but more steps now climb upward into the sleeping body of the city. Behind you, the waterfront continues its slow descent into rest, perfectly content whether you are watching or not. You follow the neighbors away from the edge, carrying the lesson of the wharf inside your limbs. Not everything must be finished. Not every minute needs filling. And sometimes the wisest thing you can do is walk at the speed of lantern light and river mist, letting the evening decide on its own when to end. You leave the wide breadth of the wharf and follow your neighbors into a narrow cut between two dark warehouses, a gap that looks more like a crack in the city than a proper street. The glow of the riverfront slips behind you with each step. Lantern light thins into soft stains on the plaster, more memory than brightness. The steady lap of water and the hollow knock of boat hulls fade away. What remains is the small echo of your footsteps on stone and the close-held hush of houses winding down. The air cools against your skin, still and light, carrying a quiet mix of soap, smoke, and damp stone. The alley draws you inward at the same slow pace your neighbors have set since you stepped off the boat. Stone walls rise on either side, worn shiny in places where generations of hands have reached out for balance. Pale plaster between dark wooden beams holds a blurred reflection of distant lanterns, as if the light has to travel a long way just to arrive here. Overhead, laundry lines crisscross the thin strip of sky and turn it into a loose, shifting ceiling. Simple robes and shirts hang heavy and still. When they sway at all, they do it lazily, as if even cloth has decided to respect bedtime. A single drop falls from one trailing sleeve, taps once on the flagstones, and disappears into a crack as if nothing important has happened. Your neighbors drift ahead of you in a loose cluster, not exactly in a line, not exactly side by side, just moving together the way water finds its level in a narrow channel. They slide around a stack of firewood, step neatly past a basket abandoned in the center of the path, and curve without discussion around a cat sprawled on the warmest patch of stone. The cat does not bother to move. It simply trusts that the world will bend for it. You follow the curve like everyone else, accepting this rule of the alley without protest. The air is flavored with boiled greens, rinsed rice, and charcoal that has finished its work and fallen into quiet ash. The alley bends once, then again. Each turn folds the world behind you another layer deeper, like tucking loose blankets around a sleeping child. The broad silver of the river becomes an idea instead of a presence at your side. Above you, the slice of sky shrinks until only a few pale stars cling between slanting roofs. A single lantern hangs from an iron hook driven into the wall, its paper sides patched where previous winters have tried to tear them away. The light is modest but stubborn, a small circle on the stones that your feet step into and out of, the way thoughts slip in and out of focus when you are almost, but not quite, asleep. Without any grand reveal, the passage opens into a courtyard, a small square of breathing space carved out of the tight houses. You feel it before you fully see it in the way your shoulders loosen as the walls pull back. Stone slabs cover the ground, their edges rounded by rain and by 1,000 patient broom strokes. At the center stands a well with a low curved wall, its rim polished smooth where countless hands have leaned to lower or lift the bucket. Tonight the rope hangs slack from a crossbeam, and the bucket rests on the stone like someone who has finally finished the last task on the long list. Around the well, the private life of Luoyang's riverfolk rests exactly where it stopped for the night. A wooden stool waits beside a doorway, its seat shiny from years of use. A shallow tub stands near the well, a thin ring of water still clinging to the inside. Children's clothes hang from a line strung between two posts, smaller shapes among the adult garments, sleeves stirring whenever the faintest breeze squeezes in from the alley. In one corner, kindling leans against a clay stove. The ashes inside still hold the gentlest warmth, barely enough to feel unless you pass very close, like the last trace of worry fading from your shoulders. Your neighbors cross the courtyard without pausing, their feet almost soundless on the worn slabs, and you go with them. On the far side, another passage waits, slimmer and darker, a thread leading on. You slip through, your sleeve brushing the cool plaster, and the stone corridor opens into a second courtyard, then later a third. Each one follows the same simple pattern: a well in the center, stone underfoot, doors, windows, and low eaves watching from the edges. In one square, water jars stand in a neat ring around the well, their rounded shoulders catching scattered light. In another, bundles of wood lean together like resting companions. In a third, pots of herbs gather in a corner, breathing out a faint green scent that makes the air feel cleaner than you deserve after such a tiring day. As you move through these linked spaces, you begin to sense the structure under their quiet surfaces. The riverfront you left behind is the face the city turns towards travelers and trade. Boats, stalls, open views, the show it performs for strangers. These courtyards are its inward pulse. Here people draw water, rinse rice, share news, solve very small problems, and postpone the big ones until morning. A door closes softly. A folded blanket rests on the threshold. A rinsed bowl dries on its side near a wall. None of these details matter much by themselves. Together they form a rhythm so steady that in your usual hurry you would never notice it. At this slower pace, the rhythm becomes the city's lullaby, simple and endlessly repeated. Somewhere between one courtyard and the next, you lose track of how many you have crossed and how many turns you have taken. The part of your mind that normally clings to maps and arrows and "this way home" finally accepts defeat and lies down. Tonight your safety is not knowing where the river lies, but in staying near the small pool of lantern light your neighbors carry with them. Your task shrinks to something manageable. You walk, you breathe, and you let the details float toward you at their own speed. Vegetables beading with water in a shallow basket, sandals resting side by side at a doorway, a dog curled tight against a wooden threshold, absolutely certain that nothing truly terrible ever happens in these alleys at night. The boundary between public street and private yard softens until it hardly exists. You find yourself folded into the slow circulation of feet and light, treated not as an outsider, but as a slightly tired newcomer who has finally learned the right walking speed, carried by the quiet heartbeat of Luoyang a little deeper toward the home waiting somewhere ahead. The courtyards grow warmer as you follow the neighbors deeper into the city's interweave. The stone under your feet remembers the sun from earlier, holding a faint, pleasant warmth that seeps through your soles. The air shifts too. The clean scent of well water and soap is slowly joined by something richer and rounder, the breath of kitchens that are not quite finished with the day. Your stomach, which has been politely pretending to be fine, suddenly remembers it has opinions. It stretches itself like a cat and announces, in the quietest possible way, that the last time it saw real food was far too long ago. A narrow passage slips you from the last courtyard into a wider lane that runs behind a row of houses. Here the city loosens its belt a little. Roof lines step back, making room for low sheds, side doors, and the tiny structures that grow wherever people cook, wash, and store the stuff of everyday survival. Thin ribbons of steam drift up from half-opened shutters, making soft columns of white that dissolve when they meet the night. The scent is no longer a general idea of dinner. It separates itself into specific notes: garlic warming gently, scallions wilting in oil, bones giving up their patience into simmering water, rice releasing its mild, fluffy fragrance. Your neighbors angle you toward the brightest of these kitchen doors. It is not bright in the way of harsh light. It is bright in the way a firefly is bright, small and sure of itself. Inside, a clay stove squats low against the wall, its surface darkened by years of fire. A pot rests on the open ring at the top, and from its lid, steady threads of steam curl upward, unhurried and unconcerned with the outside world. Each curl smells like forgiveness after a long day. You stand just inside the doorway and feel the warmth slide over your face and hands, convincing your muscles to soften another degree. You watch the choreography of the place unfold. A pair of chopping boards lie side by side on a thick wooden table. One carries the last of the leafy greens, the other has tiny crescents of ginger lined up as if they have agreed to be eaten in order. A knife rests off to the side, its edge cleaned with a rag that is more patch than original cloth. Beside the boards, a bowl holds noodles that have just been stretched by hand, long, pale strands resting in patient loops. They look like soft river currents frozen for a moment, waiting for someone to decide which pot they belong to. A neighbor nudges the pot lid aside, and the broth below answers with a soft roll of bubbles. The scent deepens, moving from pleasant to inevitable. You lean closer before you realize you are doing it, drawn by the way the steam carries with it the memory of river fish, dried herbs, and bones that once had other jobs. Everything in the pot has been asked to give a little of itself to make something larger and gentler. The surface shifts slowly, no frantic boil, just a persistent, reassuring motion like a chest rising and falling in sleep. You think briefly of the way you usually eat when you are tired. Something quick, something you barely taste, something that almost needs an apology. This broth would never accept your apology. It would just keep simmering until you learn patience. From the next doorway, another stove glows, this one with a wide pan settled on top. Oil spreads thinly across its surface, shimmering as if the pan has captured a small patch of river and coaxed it into heat. Dough pieces lie beside it, flattened into imperfect circles, ready to be turned into crisp pancakes. A hand slides one into the pan. It meets the hot oil with a gentle hiss, then settles into place, puffing slightly as if it is deeply pleased with itself. The scent of toasting flour and scallions drifts outward, wrapping itself around the cooler night air. It does not rush toward you. It simply expands until it reaches where you stand, and when it arrives, your hunger gives up pretending and presses fully forward. Further along the lane, a tiny stall opens directly onto the path. Nothing more than a counter, a few stools, and a small stove tucked under a makeshift awning. A pot of congee rests on low heat, its surface thick and soothing, with the occasional bubble blinking to the top and popping into a sleepy sigh. Beside it, jars of pickled vegetables sit in a neat row, their contents suspended in amber liquid. Turnips, cucumbers, and greens all preserved in their own salty memories of summer. A ladle waits, its handle polished by countless hands. It leans against the pot with the quiet assurance of something that always knows what to do. Your neighbors move from kitchen corner to stall, trading gestures and glances with the people working there. Here, a bowl is filled and pressed into waiting hands. There, noodles are slipped into broth and lifted out again, transformed and ready. You are drawn along in this gentle current of motion, never left behind, never pushed ahead. In some other life, you might have worried about paying, about being a burden, about having to explain yourself. In the slow lane behind the houses, your existence here is just one more ordinary thing happening among many. You exist here the way the steam exists, simply, without negotiation. Someone sets a bowl into your hands. The ceramic is warm, almost hot, and you feel the heat seep into your fingers, up your wrists, and along your forearms until even your elbows are convinced to relax. You look down into it, pale noodles floating in cloudy broth, dotted with scallion, a few thin slices of something fragrant arranged on top with more care than you think you deserve. You blow softly across the surface, watching the steam ripple away in small, fleeting patterns that disappear before you can memorize them. The first sip is both sharper and softer than you expect, the ginger bright, the broth deep and quiet underneath it. Your entire nervous system, which has been acting like a flock of startled birds all day, settles dangerously close to stillness. You eat slowly, because there is no pressure to do anything else. The lane hums around you at a low, constant level. Chopsticks tap gently against bowls. A stool scrapes once against stone, then stops. Water is poured from bucket to basin with a hollow, soothing thunk. Somewhere a lid clacks twice as it is adjusted, and then the sound falls back into the background. The shared kitchens and tiny stalls perform their nightly rituals without needing an audience, but you have been allowed a front row seat anyway. With each mouthful, the distance between you and this rhythm shrinks. By the time your bowl is nearly empty, your shoulders have forgotten what urgency felt like. You can feel heat resting comfortably in your stomach, spreading outward in slow waves that reach your back, your hands, the back of your neck. The fog on the river may gather again later. The alleys may tangle themselves into puzzles. But right now, in this lane lined with stoves breathing warm steam, you are simply a tired traveler being folded gently into the ordinary miracles of other people's kitchens, healed, one slow sip at a time, by the quiet science of broth, noodles, and neighbors who never once asked you to hurry. The last spoonful of broth drifts away from the bowl, and with it goes whatever was left of your day's defenses. Warmth rests solidly in your center, making the spaces between your ribs feel less like storage for stress and more like actual room to breathe. Your fingers loosen on the smooth rim of the bowl, and with it goes whatever was left of your day's defenses. Warmth rests solidly in your center, making the spaces between your ribs feel less like storage for stress and more like actual room to breathe. Your fingers loosen on the smooth rim of the bowl, and when it leaves your hands, you feel strangely lighter, like a pack has been quietly lifted from your shoulders without you having to make a speech about it. The lane of kitchens narrows again as you move on, following the lanterns and the backs of your neighbors through a small gap between houses. The heat from the stoves gives way to a cooler current, a gentle thread of air that smells faintly of water and something dry and fibrous, like plants that have been convinced to give up their green ambitions and become something flatter, thinner, and more easily written on. Your feet find stone again, and the soft warmth under your soles is replaced by cooler slabs that have already surrendered their daylight to the night. The alley tilts slightly and widens, and you step out onto a street that feels different the moment you enter it. It is quieter, even than the courtyard wells and family kitchens, but not empty. This is not the silence of exhaustion, where everything has slumped into bed. It is the silence of concentration, of hands finishing the last careful tasks that cannot be rushed, even if the rest of the city has decided to be done. Lanterns hang from eaves in a straight line on both sides, their light stretching the street into a soft, overlapping pattern of orange circles. Within those circles, small kingdoms of craft are still awake. On one side, a low shop opens directly onto the street, its door flung up and propped, so the knight can see what is happening inside. Along a counter, bundles of slender stalks lie in short, orderly rows, each bound with a thin strip of fiber. Rough hands work among them, splitting, trimming, smoothing. You watch as a brush head begins as a bundle of ordinary-looking hairs, goat maybe, or something with a quieter personality, then is gathered, tapped, and coaxed into a perfect point between practiced fingers. The ferrule and handle are already waiting, polished lengths of bamboo that have spent their whole lives preparing for this attachment. When the brush head meets the hollowed tip of the handle, there is a tiny, decisive press, and just like that, another instrument for translating thought into line exists. You stand a little straighter without meaning to. Even if your handwriting in your normal life is something vaguely embarrassing, more a nervous scrawl than anything resembling calligraphy, some part of you still remembers that there is power in a tool meant only for slow, deliberate strokes. Each brush on the rack by the door shines faintly where the lantern catches its lacquered handle. Their tips rest comfortably against a strip of cloth, drying from some earlier test. They look like a gathering of polite, attentive listeners, each one ready to record something that actually matters, instead of the usual frantic scribbles and half-finished lists that never get the dignity of good paper. Across the street, the scent of damp pulp and drying fibers thickens the air. Sheets of paper hang along wooden frames like pale flags, motionless in the still night. They are not the thin, bleached kind you are used to wasting without thought. These sheets are subtly uneven, each one bearing tiny variations in thickness, pale flecks of plant fiber, faint ripples where the pulp settled. Lantern light turns them into a curtain of gold-edged rectangles, catching in the faint texture and revealing swirls and patterns you would never notice in full daylight. Behind the frames, basins sit half-filled with water that reflects nothing but the lanterns and the occasional silhouette of a hand. Wooden molds dip into the cloudy liquid, emerge with a thin layer of pulp, and drip quietly. Each movement is patient, like someone ladling fog into a frame and waiting for it to decide what kind of paper it wants to be when it grows up. Excess water slips away, trickling back into the basin with a muted murmur. The wet sheets are then pressed, lifted, and laid gently onto the drying boards, where they will transform from fragile, shimmering skins into solid, silent surfaces waiting to be written on. A little further along the street, a different rhythm taps through the silence. You follow the sound to a doorway where a stone mortar sits on a low bench. Inside it, a dark stick of ink is being worked against the stone with small circular motions. Water rests in a shallow ring around the grinding area, slowly growing darker as the stick dissolves itself without complaint. Tap, circle, the hand holding the stick moves with the offhand grace of someone who has done this long enough that muscle and memory have formed a quiet partnership. The faint scent of ink rises, both mineral and slightly smoky, the smell of countless characters and brushstrokes that have not yet been born. You imagine for a brief moment what this street looks like in daylight. Apprentices hurrying with armfuls of reeds, water splashing as pulp is poured, brushes hanging out to dry like small bundles of fur. Customers testing the weight of handles and the flecks of bristles. Even then, the pace here is probably slower than anywhere else in the city. You can't rush paper. You can't shout at ink to dry faster. Brushes refuse to be hurried into shape. Everything on this street exists specifically to reward slowness and punish haste with smudges, torn fibers, and crooked lines. Tonight, though, you see this world in its gentler, wind-down mood. Most of the work is finished. The few remaining tasks are the kind that require very little talk and absolutely no urgency. Cleaning a stone, aligning a row of drying sheets, retying a bundle of stalks, or twisting a cord tight around a stack of bamboo handles. Your neighbors walk you through the center of the street, lantern circles rising and falling at your feet like small moons. You move between the soft rasp of fibers being trimmed, the faint swish of water in basins, and the distant regular tap of the ink grinder. As you pass one shop, your fingers brush lightly against a hanging rack of finished brushes. Their lacquered handles are cool and smooth, the grain beneath the finish still faintly visible. The bristles, though dry, hold together in a coherent point, ready for the smallest dip into ink. You feel, absurdly, as if they are a row of tiny reeds, frozen in the moment just before a current moves through them. Your thoughts, normally in a messy tangle, begin to line up in the same way that the paper does on the drying boards, one after another with space between each sheet. It is almost uncomfortable, this much clarity, when you are so used to chaos, but the comfort wins. The neighbors do not hurry you. You linger in front of each doorway as much as you like, absorbing the quiet rituals of finishing up. On the street of brushes and paper, the day does not end with a slam, but with a gradual thinning of motion, a soft erasing of sound. At some point, without fanfare, you realize that this place is about as friendly to frantic multitasking as a still pond is to stomping. If you insisted on rushing, the entire street would simply outlast you. It would keep grinding, dipping, hanging, pressing, while your urgency burned itself out and fell silent. By the time you reach the end of the craft street, your own inner lines feel finer, more deliberate. The rough scribble of your day has been quietly replaced by slower strokes, elongated and graceful, as if some internal brush has finally been given better paper and decent ink. In the glow of lamplight on drying sheets and lacquered handles, folded gently into the patient routines of brush makers, paper dryers, and ink grinders, you step onward with neighbors who treat you like another small work in progress, something that simply needs time, repetition, and a softer, more steady hand. The craft street thins behind you until the last doorway closes like a gently folded fan, leaving only the line of lanterns ahead and the patient shuffle of your neighbor's footsteps. Roofs step down, then stagger, then begin to leave gaps between them. The tight weave of alleys and workshops loosens thread by thread, and cooler night air slips in more freely, edged with something green and faintly earthy. After so much stone and wood, the first hint of open land feels almost abrupt, like someone has cracked a hidden window in the middle of your thoughts. The paving stones under your feet give way, little by little, to packed earth. At first, it is just a worn strip where cartwheels have bitten deeper, then wider patches where roots have politely pushed through from below. Your steps grow softer, making more of a hush than a sound. Dust lifts with each footfall and settles again immediately, too shy to cling to your clothes. Lanterns do most of the work now that the buildings have retreated. They hang from simple poles and from the lower branches of trees, their circles of light falling onto leaves that gleam in the dark like slow-breathing things. You notice that the city's wall of houses has not exactly ended. It has leaned back to make space for something else. On either side of the path, low fences appear, no higher than your hip, woven from branches in patterns that are more habit than decoration. Beyond them, beds of soil stretch in neat rectangles. Even in the dimness, you see the quiet geometry. Rows of cabbages like sleeping green fists, thin lines of onions standing at attention, waves of leafy green spilling over their borders in soft, unruly curls. Between the beds run narrow furrows where water has recently passed, leaving dark, shining trails that catch the lantern glow. The air grows thicker with the scent of living plants and freshly turned earth. This is not the clipped, ornamental smell of a decorative park. This is the smell of work and patience. It carries the cool mineral note of river silt, the damp sweetness of compost, and the faintly bitter insistence of herbs that have strong opinions about being eaten. Your lungs, usually stuck with recycled air and stale corridors, take this in greedily, as if they've been waiting all along for something that smells like actual life. You had no idea your breathing could sound this quiet when it is finally not fighting anything. Your neighbors slow even further, which you did not think was physically possible. Their lanterns drift toward the edges of the path, pausing near each fenced plot as naturally as you might pause at your own kitchen counter. Hands reach down to pinch a leaf between thumb and finger, tilting it toward the light to check for spots or small invaders. A clod of earth is nudged with the toe of a shoe, breaking into crumbs that expose more of its dark, forgiving interior. A thin bamboo ladle rests inside an irrigation ditch, its handle bridging water and path like a miniature version of the river steps you climbed earlier. Nothing here is dramatic, yet everything quietly insists that someone cares. Farther along, the kitchen gardens loosen into something more expansive. Fences stretch out, then fade into lines of trees where the river's floodplain begins. You hear water again, not the intimate lap of boats against stone, but a broader rushing where channels are opened and closed. The Luo River, which had wandered off while you threaded through courtyards and workshops, returns to walk beside you, a little wilder here where it meets the fields. Its banks are softer, less armored by stone. Tufts of grass lean into the water's edge, and low willows dip their thin branches as if they are forever trying to taste the current. Orchards spread along the higher ground, rows of fruit trees with trunks just wide enough to show their age without boasting. Their branches knit overhead in loose canopies that catch lantern light in scattered coins. Some trees hold the last pale ghosts of blossoms. Others cradle small, hard fruits that have not yet decided how big they want to be. Fallen petals lie in drifts along the paths between trunks, softening the earth in irregular patches. When your foot brushes through them, there is no sound, only a faint change in texture, like stepping from one kind of cloud onto another. Your neighbors move among the trees with the same modest authority they carried in kitchens and craft stalls. Here, a hand rests briefly against a trunk, feeling the dampness in the bark. There, fingers brush soil away from the base of a sapling to check that its roots still drink well. Clay jars sit half-emburied at the edges of some plots, their mouths open to collect water that will be poured out carefully later. You see channels cut to guide overflow, ridges shaped to hold moisture, baskets stacked for morning harvest, poles waiting to prop up branches when they finally surrender to the weight of fruit. All the tiny maintenance tasks that keep a city alive are tucked out here at its edge, humming quietly in the dark. You think of how you normally meet food: plastic that crackles, labels that shout, lights that hum coldly over aisles pretending strawberries are a year-round event. Out here, where mist curls along the riverbank and dirt clings comfortably to the hem of every robe, the idea of anything being always available feels a little ridiculous. The plants keep their own schedules and are refreshingly unimpressed by cravings. You are welcome to benefit from their generosity, but you don't get to tell them when to grow. For once, that loss of control feels less like a problem and more like relief. You can stand down. The cabbages have got this. A thin layer of mist lies low over the furthest beds, silvering leaves and softening the outlines of trees. It moves slowly, breathing in time with the river, thicker where channels run and thinner under the shelter of branches. Your lanterns carve gentle tunnels through it as you walk, revealing just enough of each step and then letting it blur behind you again. Occasionally your foot sinks a little deeper where the soil is damp from watering, and a cool patch presses through sandal and cloth. The first time it happens, some leftover part of your mind automatically complains about mud. By the third or fourth step, that inner complaint department has closed for the evening. Mud, it turns out, is just the earth reminding you that you are not made of glass. From somewhere ahead, the faint sound of a wooden wheel reaches you, creaking rhythmically as it lifts water in slow, repetitive motions. A simple water wheel works in the darkness, its buckets dipping into the river and rising to spill into a raised canal. Even this contraption has no urgency in it. Each rotation is deliberate, steady, utterly indifferent to any deadlines you might be tempted to impose. It will turn as long as the river pushes it and someone cares enough to keep it in repair, and not a moment longer. You walk beside the channel it feeds, listening to the shallow run of water as it threads itself back toward the gardens, a pale ribbon on darker earth. Wherever it passes, the ground is a little richer, the plants a little more confident. You don't know exactly where the city ends and the countryside begins, nor can you see where the gardens finally give up and let the wild grasses take over. The mist ahead hides those borders on purpose, smoothing edges the way sleep smooths the boundary between one thought and the next. All you really know is that you are being walked, gently and without fanfare, through the lungs and stomach of this place, the fields and trees and riverbanks that feed and breathe for Luoyang, so that when the time comes to rest, you will understand, somewhere deep in your bones, that the city will go on quietly ripening and renewing itself, even while you sleep. You walk on with the neighbors until the gardens begin to fold back toward the city, the path bending in a long, lazy arc that nudges you away from the river's open breath and toward the more tangled, human kind of air. Lanterns withdraw from tree branches and return to poles and doorways, their light gathering itself into smaller, more deliberate pools. The night has deepened into that quiet middle stretch where even the insects seem to whisper, and the mist, which has been lounging along the riverbank, decides it is finally time to get involved again. It lifts from the water in thin, silvery layers and begins to wander inland, nosing its way between rows of cabbages and climbing gently up the slopes of the path. At first it is lovely. The furrows, which were neat and sharp beneath lantern light, soften into faint ridges. The leaves of the trees blur at the edges, becoming gentle smudges against the sky. The lanterns themselves grow halos, transparent crowns that make each one look less like a practical object and more like some small, patient spirit politely minding its own business. You breathe in, and the mist touches your throat and the inside of your nose with a cool, damp finger, as if it is politely checking that you are still awake. Your skin prickles pleasantly where the night air has grown just a little colder. You and your neighbors step back onto more solid ground, the packed earth giving way again to stone, The city, clearly not wanting anyone to accuse it of being predictable, now shows you a different face than it did earlier. You do not return along exactly the same route you took out to the gardens. Instead, the path takes a new angle, slipping between a storehouse and a low wall, then curling toward a part of Luoyang you do not remember seeing. The roofs feel slightly taller here, leaning a little more keenly over the street, and the alleys have the particular confidence of places that are used to being navigated in the dark. The mist follows, thickening as it moves between the houses. It pours down from the open spaces behind you like water from a tipped jar, filling the lower reaches of the city first. It does not swallow things whole. It prefers to edit them. Corners vanish first, then sharp edges, then the finer details that your eyes normally lean on for reassurance. Door frames stay, but their carved lintels fade. Roof tiles become continuous shadow. The gaps between buildings are less obviously gaps and more like soft gray pauses. Your world narrows to everything that exists within the small glowing circle of the nearest lantern. Beyond that circle, shapes retreat into suggestion. You realize how much you have been relying on those shapes when the route takes yet another turn and one of your neighbors lifts a lantern slightly as if to check something only they can see. The alley ahead looks exactly like the one you just left. Same width, same plaster walls, same faint shine on the stone where water has recently run. Somewhere nearby, a door closes with a gentle thud, and a faint spill of light escapes at ankle height before disappearing. A dog barks once, then apparently thinks better of it. The sound bounces off the walls and loses its owner in the fog. The group thins as you go. This is not a betrayal. It is just people peeling off into their own homes, their own courtyards, their own nightly rituals. One neighbor touches a gate post in a way that says silently, "This is me," and steps sideways into a shadow that swallows them with familiar ease. Another slips through a low arch where the smell of drying herbs and warm straw clings to the air. Their lanterns vanish behind doors or shutters, leaving their circles of light to collapse neatly in on themselves. You have been folded and carried along with them for so long that you hardly notice the difference at first. Then, somewhere between one corner and the next, you suddenly do. You glance ahead and behind and realize, with the delayed, dusty thump of recognition, that the number of shoulders around you has shrunk to a handful. The nearest faces you can still see are gentle and unbothered, but they are not the same ones who met you on the wharf. A new neighbor lifts a lantern to check your expression, and something in you smiles automatically, not wanting to admit you have absolutely no idea where your own doorway is in all of this. The part of your brain that normally prides itself on being good with directions chooses this moment to pretend it has never met you. You try for a few steps to pretend with it. The mist is not that thick, you tell yourself. You can still see the stones under your feet, the slight slope of the alley, the maybe familiar shape of that roof line. Surely if you pay attention, something will click. But the city, swaddled in fog, has slipped into a softer version of itself where individual features are less important than the overall mood. Each courtyard entrance looks like the last. A wooden gate, a low step, a faint line of wear where countless feet have passed. Each side passage is an echo of the previous one, half hidden by drifting gray. Even the wells, if you could find them, would be nothing more than slightly darker circles in the mist. A small, reasonable unease settles at the back of your neck. Not panic, not even sharp worry, but a gentle, insistent tap that says you personally could not find your own sleeping mat right now if it walked up and introduced itself. You are not alone. Neighbors still move near you, their lanterns floating like small suns in a cloudy sky. But as they reach their own corners of the city and peel away, your sense of being escorted trades places with something else. The awkward awareness that at some point everyone else will assume you know where you are going. You pause in the small widening of the alley, a place that might be a tiny square or might just be where two streets failed to agree on a straight line. Mist curls around your ankles and fingers, pouring past you like slow water. The walls retreat half a step into gray, leaving you on a little island of stone and lantern light. 3 possible paths open away from you, each one framed by similar doorways and similarly sloped roofs, each one promising to be the correct route if you only stare hard enough. You stand there, turning slightly, as if some angle will suddenly make one path glow brighter. None of them oblige. Your heartbeat nudges upward, not in a frantic way, but in the way it does when you are very tired and suddenly remember you left something important somewhere you can't immediately name. Your body is not convinced that this counts as a real problem. After all, the night is quiet, the air is cool, and nothing here has raised its voice at you. Still, there is a thin thread of worry winding lazily through your chest, weaving itself around your ribs. Your usual survival strategy, check your phone, follow the map, pretend you're not lost, has politely excused itself and gone to bed hours ago. You stay where you are because moving in a random direction feels like it would be an insult to the city's patient architecture. The mist thickens for a moment, as if taking your measure, then thins again in slow breath. Lantern light from other alleys drifts through in soft blurs, never quite revealing the people who carry it, but hinting at them, like distant stars behind thin cloud. Somewhere a door opens and closes. A wooden ladle taps once against the rim of a bucket. A rooster, who clearly does not understand clocks, makes a half-hearted test sound and then goes back to whatever roosters do when they realize it is still very much the middle of the night. This is the exact moment when your mind would normally start narrating disaster scenarios at speed. Instead, something about the fog, the lanterns, and the steady, unhurried pulse of the city refuses to support that tendency. You cannot see your destination. True. You do not know which gate hides your borrowed bed. Also true. But you are standing in the middle of a city that has been walking people home for longer than you have been capable of worrying. Its streets have guided drunk fishermen, distracted artisans, children more interested in stray cats than directions, and elders whose feet just remember where to go. The mist hides the details, but it does not conceal the fact that you are held inside a pattern much older and more reliable than your sense of orientation. So you do the only reasonable thing left. You stay still. You let the mist move instead of you. You breathe with it, matching its slow drift. You notice how the lantern in your nearest neighbor's hand paints a soft circle on the stones, and how more circles flicker at a distance, bobbing slightly as people move through other lanes. The faint unease is still there, but it curls up politely in a corner rather than tearing around the room. Somewhere in the thickening quiet, a new kind of movement begins. Slightly more purposeful footsteps, the shuffle of more than one person approaching, the subtle murmur of a city that has noticed one of its travelers hovering uncertainly in the mist and is preparing, in its own unhurried way, to lead them the rest of the way home. The first thing that reaches you is the sound of more footsteps. They are not hurried, not sharp, just a thicker layer added to the soft shuffling already threaded through the fog. They arrive from more than one direction, some from behind, some from side alleys that a moment ago looked like pure gray. The mist parts in slow, polite folds, and more lanterns appear. Small circles of light bobbing closer, like a cluster of fireflies that have decided to unionize. You stand in the wider patch of stone where you paused, as if on a tiny stage built specifically for lost travelers, and watch the lanterns gather. They do not swarm, they assemble. Each one comes with a pair of hands and a familiar ease, the same kind of quietly capable faces you have been following since the wharf. If the city has an informal system for retrieving any stray humans who have let the mist eat their sense of direction, this is clearly it. Someone somewhere noticed that you had stalled, or perhaps it is simply that the streets themselves whispered the news along their stones. Either way, you're no longer a lone dot in the fog. The small unease in your chest, which had been sitting upright and paying attention, now leans back against the wall and yawns. Your world that had shrunk to one uncertain circle of light expands again, not into clear, crisp outlines, but into overlapping halos. Lanterns line up themselves almost by instinct, never perfectly symmetrical, but balanced in that loose, organic way that happens when people who know each other very well decide to walk together. You find yourself near the center of this slowly forming constellation, not because anyone pushes you there, but because gentle nudges and angles of shoulders quietly insist on it. Someone adjusts the nearest lantern a little lower, as if to make sure you can see the stones directly in front of your feet. Another steps half a pace ahead, not so far that you feel left behind, but far enough that their circle of light touches yours, creating a shallow overlap where uncertainty does not stand a chance. More pairs of feet arrive at the edges, filling in gaps. A lantern swings up from a side alley, its bearer falling into step at the rear without a word. Before you fully realize what has happened, the little island of stone where you had been marooned has transformed into the starting point of a procession. The group begins to move, not all at once like a marching band, but in a gradual rolling way, a front step here, a middle shuffle there, a rear foot catching up. The procession unfurls like a ribbon, curling into the narrow lane you had been eyeing and silently arguing with. The mist, which had been confidently occupying every available space, now finds its real estate gently reduced. Where the lantern circles pass, it thins, stepping back to the sides and the upper corners of the alley, clinging to eaves and pooling on windowsills like a sulking cat. You walk in the center of the light, your steps automatically matching the rhythm of those around you. The earlier impulse to stride ahead and solve the problem by force has melted, replaced by a willingness to be gently carried. The stone under your feet is the same as before, slightly damp, occasionally uneven, but it no longer feels treacherous. With so many lanterns making small, overlapping maps of each step, the alley becomes less like a maze and more like a hallway in a very large, slightly eccentric house. As you move, the city begins to show you parts of itself you would never have seen if you had gone the correct way on the first try. The procession passes doorways, half concealed by drifting gray, their lintels carved with simple patterns that only show themselves in fleeting glimpses when a lantern swings by at just the right angle. You catch sight of a pair of straw sandals left neatly on a step, toes pointing toward the door in a way that declares their owner will not be needing them again until sunrise. A clay pot sits under an eave, catching the occasional drip from the roof. The water inside trembles when your group passes, then settles back into a tiny, reflective calm. At one corner, the path sinks slightly, and a shallow runnel of water hugs one side, guiding the night's small spills toward a drain you cannot see. The lanterns pick up the faint shine of the trickle, turning it into a thin thread of gold that keeps pace with you for several steps before slipping off down another gutter. The mist thickens here, swirling a little more vigorously as if annoyed at being displaced, but too sleepy to mount a proper protest. The procession simply narrows, adjusting without fuss, lanterns lifting briefly to avoid brushing against low eaves, then settling back into their usual height. There is something almost ceremonial about it, though no one has changed clothes or put on special faces. This is just how the city handles a minor misalignment. It sends out its people with lanterns, gathers up whoever is wandering in the fog, and escorts them through the sleeping quarter as if they are carrying a guest of honor instead of a slightly disoriented traveler who ate too much broth. You can't shake the feeling that, somewhere, the river is watching this with quiet approval, the way it watched boats returning earlier. The mist that gave you trouble is the same mist that makes the lanterns look so tender, so necessary. House by house, the neighborhood demonstrates its nighttime grammar. A window glows faintly behind a paper screen, the light inside dim and steady, suggesting hands still finishing some quiet task. Another window shows nothing but shadow. That room has already surrendered fully to sleep. A line of laundry stretches overhead, the fabric turning the lantern light into muted, floating rectangles. A broom leans against a wall, bristles drying for tomorrow. Above, a sliver of moon occasionally appears between roofs and fog, then ducks away again, like someone peeking through a curtain and deciding the procession is well in hand. You realize, somewhere between turns, that you are no longer trying to memorize the route. If you had to retrace these steps alone tomorrow, you would be hopeless. The alleys repeat themselves with confident anonymity, each gate wearing the same comfortable arrangement of scuffs and scratches. Yet, in this moment, that doesn't matter. For once your brain is allowed to drop the compulsion to record and anticipate. You are not here to learn the map. You are here to be moved along it. The city, through its neighbors, is making a simple promise in the language of lantern circles and synchronized footsteps. You do not have to know everything all the time. The procession threads through one more hidden lane, this one narrower and slightly steeper, as if the houses have quietly leaned in for warmth. Mist clings to the upper walls, leaving the lower half clearer, so that your world becomes a corridor of stone and doorways capped by a floating ceiling of soft gray. Lantern light climbs the walls halfway, then loses itself in vapor. Your foot slips once on a patch of moss made slick by the damp, but a steadying hand finds your elbow before you have time to flail. The grip is brief, firm, and then gone again, as if the correction has already been filed and the night wants to keep the paperwork light. Gradually, the alleys begin to widen. The walls tilt back, the rooftops part a little, allowing more of the sky to press in. The mist, perhaps sensing that it has done its job of temporarily rearranging the city into a softer, more mysterious shape, starts lifting in thin strands, unraveling itself into nothing. The lanterns of your neighbors burn just as steadily, but they now share space with the faint silver haze of stars and a low, quiet glow in the east that hints, treacherously early, at the existence of dawn somewhere far away. You step out of the tightest of the hidden lanes into another small open space, wider than the patch of stone where you first realized you were lost, but with the same sense of being a pause rather than the destination. Only this time you do not feel like an island. You are one bright point in a moving constellation of lanterns that has carried you smoothly through the sleeping quarter, transforming what could have been a lonely, anxious wander into a calm, glowing procession. The city, through its neighbors, has gathered you up and is now turning you, with the gentlest of arcs, towards the place where you will finally be able to lie down and let the mist finish its work inside your mind, blurring the last sharp edges of wakefulness into something much softer. From the small open space, the lanterns do not surge forward. They pause, as if the city is taking a gentle breath before the next line of its nighttime poem. The alleys you came from fold backward into shadow. Ahead, the path toward your borrowed courtyard waits, but for once, Luoyang seems in no particular hurry to tuck you in. One of the neighbors lifts their lantern slightly and tilts their head, not to ask a question, but in that unmistakable way people do when there is one last thing worth seeing before bed. Your feet, which have been obediently following all evening, decide they are on board with this. Instead of diving back into the tight maze of ground-level lanes, the group angles toward a short, squat building at the edge of the square. Its doors and windows are already dark, but a narrow stairway presses up along one side, a shallow zigzag of stone steps leading toward the flat suggestion of a roof. The stairs look like they were added as an afterthought, then gradually worn into importance by countless pairs of feet. Lantern light spills upward along them, turning each riser into a small glowing shelf. You start to climb. The steps are a little uneven, because of course they are. This city has no interest in straight lines. One is taller, one is shorter, another has a chipped corner that insists on being noticed under your toes. Your hand brushes the rough wall for balance, fingertips catching on the small ridges and dents that tell the story of people who have made this same climb to find quieter air. The lanterns ascend with you in a slow spiral, their light sliding over stone, then plaster, then the first dark line of roof edging. The mist, having thinned in the open space, hangs below like a low, blurred tide. When you reach the top, the nighttime world opens sideways rather than forward. The roof is broad and flat, edged by a low parapet that radiates residual warmth from the day. Tiles or packed earth, you cannot quite tell in the dimness, spread underfoot, solid and reassuring. The lanterns fan out, finding comfortable perches on upturned tiles, near chimneys, against the stub of a weathered roof beam. Their circles of light overlap and then relax, not needed as urgently here, where the sky takes on more of the work. You walk toward the edge. As you do, your shoulders unconsciously shift, rolling back to make room for something bigger than the cramped shapes of alleys. The view drops away, then reforms at a new scale. Below, Luoyang lies in soft layers of shadow and glow. Roofs stack like carelessly piled books. Courtyards appear as darker squares between them, and narrow lanes thread through it all in lines of intermittent light. The mist sits in uneven patches, filling some low places more than others, turning sections of the city into drifting, silvered islands. From up here, your earlier confusion looks almost charming. The neighborhood you worried about navigating suddenly resembles a modest handful of blocks that a child could redraw with a piece of charcoal and an extra scrap of paper. Farther off, the Lua River curves in a wide, calm sweep, a polished band of steel gray under the scattered lanterns of the wharf you left hours ago. The water keeps moving, but from this height, its restlessness has been downgraded to a slow, continuous slide. The boats are just small, dark stamps near the banks now, some already tucked under overhanging roofs, others still nosing their way home with the last of the night's cargo. The steps you climbed earlier to leave the boat are invisible in the gloom, yet you remember them clearly. The cool stone, the grooves worn by feet, the way the mist curled at ankle level. From here, that memory feels like the first page of a story you are finally reading at the right speed. You tip your head back and find the sky. It has been hiding most of the night, reduced to thin strips between roofs and laundry lines. Now it expands, shrugging off those narrow frames and stretching out in all directions. Stars push through the high, thin haze, not a blinding spill of light, but a quiet scatter of points that seem less interested in impressing you and more interested in simply being there. They blink with no particular agenda, some brighter, some stubbornly faint. A slow, pale smear of cloud creeps over one corner of the sky, catching enough moonlight to resemble a distant glowing river of its own. Up here, the sounds of the city rearrange themselves. The sharp individual noises of close quarters, ladles, footsteps, the occasional timid rooster, sink into a broader, more blended hum. You hear the river's voice as a deeper, continuous undertone, humming along the edge of your awareness. Above that lies the soft static of sleeping houses, wind nudging tiles, fabric shifting on lines, the mudded thump of something small hopping from one roof to another in search of a better warm spot. Somewhere far away, a dog offers a single, speculative bark and then apparently loses interest. You lean gently against the parapet, feeling its solid weight under your forearms. The stone is warmer than you expect, still holding the memory of afternoon sun. It supports your weight without complaint, which is more than you can say for some of the chairs in your daily life. From this rooftop, the entire sequence of your evening compresses into something simple and coherent. The boat, the wharf and its unhurried stalls, the courtyards with their wells, the kitchens breathing out warm steam where broth turned your stress into something slow and heavy, the street of brushes and paper where ink insisted on taking its time, the gardens and orchards at the edge, quietly making future meals, the moment in the fog when you had to admit you were genuinely, if politely, lost, the lantern procession that turned that small problem into a moving festival of reassurance. All of it sits below you now, packed into a soft, sprawling shape. The worry that felt so present when the mist first thickened is here too, but from up on the roof it has shrunk dramatically. It resembles a tiny blot of darker shadow in one of the alleys, something you would have to be specifically looking for to notice. Your to-do list, that many-headed creature waiting for you back in the other world, would have a hard time crossing this distance. To reach you here, it would have to climb the river steps, navigate courtyards, wait patiently for broth, observe proper respect for paper, get its feet muddy in the gardens, and survive being thoroughly ignored during a lantern-lit procession. It is difficult to imagine your anxieties being that disciplined. Your neighbors settle nearby, some sitting on low stools, others perching on folded blankets, a few simply leaning their backs against chimneys or raised sections of the roof. No one fusses with the scene. No one points out constellations or names landmarks. They don't need to. Their very posture says what this rooftop is for: to look down and remember how small the intricate chaos of the streets becomes when viewed from even a modest height, and to look up and see that above the tangle of beams and tiles and mist, the sky is still operating on its own slower terms. You let your gaze drift back to the river. A patch of moonlight has found it and is now riding along its surface, stretching and thinning as it slips past moored boats and under the faint dots of lanterns. You follow its path visually until your eyes grow tired and the silver smear becomes less distinct. Somewhere between one blink and the next, your breathing lengthens, matching the river's long exhale. That earlier sense of needing to figure things out loses its footing and drifts away like one of the small leaves now circling lazily in an unnoticed rooftop puddle. Up here, with the rooftops at your feet, the stars above, and the slow river unrolling in the distance, you are not exactly above your life, you are simply at a quieter angle of it. The city has brought you to a vantage point where all its moving parts, the alleys, the kitchens, the crafts, the gardens, even the fog that momentarily hid your way, can be seen as different rhythms in a single, patient piece of music. You are just one instrument among many, free to rest for a few bars while the river, the stars, and the soft machinery of Luoyang's night continue playing on. The rooftop holds you for a little while longer, as if wanting to be sure the view has had time to soak properly into the cracks of your memory. The river's silver curve, the soft islands of mist in the streets below, the lantern constellations stitched between roofs, all of it settles somewhere behind your eyes in a way that feels stubbornly permanent. When you finally push yourself gently away from the parapet, the stone leaves a faint warmth on your forearms, like the last touch of a hand letting go without urgency. Descending is a different sort of work than climbing. The steps feel narrower now, each one asking for a little more of your attention. Lantern light spills downward, sliding over the edges of the stairs and pooling ahead of your toes before slipping away again. Your hand trails along the wall, tracing the shallow grooves left by other palms that have made this same quiet journey from rooftop air back into the denser atmosphere of streets and rooms. Your feet find the irregular rhythm of the steps without complaint, and if you misjudge the height once or twice, the corrections are small and almost sleepy. At the bottom, the city's closer sounds crowd back in. Though crowd is generous, they are too gentle to deserve such an energetic verb. You step onto a lane that breathes with the last small exertions of the night. Somewhere nearby, a shutter sighs along its track as it is pulled closed. Wooden slats meet with a soft final contact, not a slam, more a nod. The echo runs down the alleyway in miniature, touching walls and door frames, then fading. A broom whispers across stone, gathering the day's dust and leaf fragments into small, obedient heaps. The soft scrape of bristles has the exact tempo of someone brushing crumbs from a tablecloth after guests have gone. You and your neighbors begin to retrace your path, or something close enough to it that your body accepts the story. Lanterns tilt toward doorways as you pass, catching the edges of signs that dangle at odd angles, the paint on them dulled by years of river air. One shop that glowed warmly earlier on the craft street now shows only the lean silhouette of its doorframe. The racks of brushes inside are mere faint shapes. A faint line of powdered fiber on the threshold gleams under the lantern's eye, proof that someone tidied the day's work into neat bundles before bowing out. Another corner reveals the ghost of a paper stall. The drying frames are mostly empty now, the last few sheets waiting in the cool night air. They sag slightly at the edges, relaxed rather than tired, their surfaces catching just enough light to show texture, but not enough to reveal every imperfection. The basins that once held cloudy pulp sit still and dark, water inside reflecting a sliver of lantern flame like a small trapped star. You walk past, and the reflection wobbles, then steadies, a tiny echo of your own path through the city. Everywhere you look, doors are halfway through the act of becoming walls. Some have already completed the transformation, shutters drawn, bars settled, latches slipped quietly into place. Others linger in in-between states, open just wide enough for a final conversation you cannot hear, or a last pot to be carried inside. Window screens glow faintly in a few houses, silhouettes passing occasionally behind them, soft and slow. Curtains stir where the night air nudges them, making brief, ghost-like appearances in the gaps before retreating again. The smell of kitchens has changed too. Earlier it was a summons, loud and persuasive, full of intention. Now it is residue. You catch thin threads of cooled oil, the faint sweetness of rice crust drying at the bottom of a pot, the low, lingering perfume of ginger that refuses to leave entirely. A stack of bowls sits inverted near a doorway, water beads drying on their upturned bases. A single ladle hangs from a peg, its bowl clean and hollow, like an open palm. The stoves themselves are quiet shapes in the dark, their mouths closed, their ash cold or nearly there. They look like they are exhaling the last thoughts of the day in slow, invisible streams. The courtyards you slip through on the way back have also shifted. Wells that gleamed earlier under steady lantern light now crouch in deeper shadow, their rims damp and slightly reflective. The ropes hang more loosely, no longer under the tension of repeated lowering and lifting. Laundry that once caught the last warmth of evening now hangs cool and still, shapes barely distinguishable except where a lantern's edge brushes them into brief definition. A bucket rests on its side near a wall, tilted just enough to let a last thin trickle find the cracks between stones. Every repeated space, a small stitch tightens in your memory. The first courtyard with its polished well, the second where the herbs breathed out a shy green scent, the third with its ring of water jars, they all reappear, but softer now, deepening from impressions into the kind of rememberable places that will pop into your mind months from now when you least expect it. Your body recognizes the slight shifts in level between one courtyard and the next, the places where you instinctively shorten your stride to avoid a raised stone, the corner where you know a cat might be, tail flicking lazily. The streets themselves perform their closing rituals with practiced grace. At the edge of a warehouse, a man-sized bundle of sacks leans against the wall, tied and ready for tomorrow. Brooms stand bristles up in a cluster like a small forest of upside-down trees waiting for daylight. A shuttered stall still carries the faint chalk outline of today's prices, half faded by the damp air. You glance at it and understand none of the numbers in any useful way, yet the sight reassures you. Trade has happened, meals have been served, useful work has filled the day, and now all those things are being gently folded away. You move past the point where the craft street melted into kitchen lanes, and the tone shifts back toward the domestic. Dogs who earlier supervised the alleys with mild interest now lie fully committed to sleep, curled noses tucked into tails. Children's toys, a wooden hoop, a cloth ball, a carved top, rest where small hands drop them at the call of bath water and blankets. A single sandal lies crooked near a door, its missing partner presumably already safe inside. Even without seeing anyone, you feel surrounded by people who exist in this city not as picturesque extras, but as real bodies breathing behind walls and screens, trusting their streets to hold through the night. Behind you, the rooftop view still glows in your mind, a wide, layered picture that shows how all these small details add up to something durable. Ahead of you, the lantern carried by your nearest neighbor sways in a slow arc, painting a moving circle on the ground that you keep stepping into and out of, like a heartbeat you share for the moment. Each shutter that closes, each broom sweep that nudges a strip of dust into order, each pot stacked, each latch settled, these are the last notes of today's song. As you walk through them, gathering quiet impressions like small, smooth stones to slip into your pocket, you feel the city stitching itself securely into your memory, thread by thread, so that later, when you lie down at last, Luoyang will be there on the inside of your eyelids, already familiar, already homeward. The lanes narrow again as you leave the last of the closing shops behind. At this point, you have surrendered completely to the lantern at the front and the soft hush of footsteps around you. Whatever part of your brain still wants to pretend it is in charge has been gently wrapped in a blanket and told to sit quietly in the corner. The city moves under your feet in familiar patterns now, up a shallow rise, along a stretch of stones that tilt slightly toward a gutter, down 2 steps where rain once insisted on carving its own shortcut. Even if you could not redraw the map, your muscles have started to recognize the sequence like a lullaby learned by repetition. The mist has mostly retreated back down to its favorite low places, though thin strands still hang in the air here and there, catching lantern light in faint, suspended droplets. The night has settled into its deepest register. The river's hum is distant, the rooftop view a warm echo at the back of your mind. You pass another courtyard entrance, then another, each one wearing its own mild signature. A faint whiff of drying fish from one, the sharper snap of stored firewood being shifted behind another door, the muffled cluck of a very opinionated chicken from somewhere deep inside a third. Each gate is a slightly different face of the same quiet idea. Home, but not yours. And then without any fanfare, you arrive at the gate that is. You do not know why you are certain at first. Visually, it could be any number of its neighbors. A wooden frame with a modest carved lintel, a low step worn in the middle, a paper lantern hanging just inside the overhang. But as you stand there, the air around it tells on it. The scent is the first clue, a blend of cooled rice, faint smoke, and something herbaceous and clean, like a handful of leaves crushed lightly between fingers. There is also the subtle, comforting trace of the broth you ate earlier, as if the steam from that shared stove has seeped into the wood over time, forming a quiet memory of every evening's soup. Sound follows scent. Somewhere within, water shifts in a basin, just once, then stills. Fabric brushes against fabric in the way blankets do when they are shaken out and laid down. From deeper inside, a small irregular thump suggests someone adjusting a stool or nudging a chest a few inches to one side to make room. Even the silence between those noises has a particular weight, the kind that comes from people who are winding down their day without hurry, confident that everything they really needed to do has been done. Your pulse, which has been coasting pleasantly for a while now, gives a small surprised nod. Against all odds, the city has steered you to the right threshold. The neighbors ease to a halt around you, their lanterns forming a loose crescent that spills light over the gate, the step, and the stones just beyond. No one rushes to push the door open like they are unveiling a surprise. The moment is allowed to stretch in that gentle, elastic way that good bedtimes often do. You stand for a breath or two, simply feeling the weight of the courtyard on the other side. Its air, its history, the stored warmth of all the days that have come before this one. You might be a guest here, or a temporary inhabitant, or someone staying longer than expected. It doesn't seem to matter. In the city's quiet accounting, you are, tonight, one of the people who belongs behind this door. A hand reaches past you, not to shove the gate, but to touch it near the latch, fingertips resting there for a heartbeat, as if greeting it. The wood responds with a soft creak, not the protesting screech of neglect, but the familiar sound of a door that has opened and closed so often it treats the action like breathing. The gate swings inward on its worn hinges, revealing the dim interior square of the courtyard you first crossed hours ago, now wrapped more tightly in shadow. The well in the center glints faintly, its rim ringed by small puddles where water has splashed in recent use. The stone slabs are darker toward the corners, where night collects most easily. You step over the threshold. It is a small literal step, but everything on the other side feels slightly thicker, like entering a pool of denser air. The lanterns follow, their light reshaping the familiar shapes of the courtyard. The low stool by the door, the line of drying laundry now almost entirely swallowed by dark, the row of water jars, ranged like quiet sentries along the far wall. There is an extra detail now that wasn't there earlier. A folded mat resting near one doorway, its woven surface neat, a blanket piled beside it in soft, inviting thickness. The slight indentation in the mat's center tells you that someone checked it with their hand earlier, testing for comfort, deciding it was enough for tonight. The neighbors move through the courtyard with the unhurried efficiency of people whose hospitality is not a performance, but a habit. One lantern is hung from a hook at the entryway, its flame trimmed so it will last the night without flaring too bright. Another is set on a low stool near the well, its circle of light catching the lip of a ceramic basin already half filled with clean water. A bucket stands beside it, and a small wooden dipper rests across its mouth, arranged in that unspoken invitation that needs no explanation. Wash away the dust before you lie down. You feel acutely, and then soothingly, how much of the evening has attached itself to your body. The faint grit on your soles from garden paths, the cool residue of mist on your sleeves, the traces of smoke and broth and paper pulp in your hair and clothes. You lean over the basin, cupping water in your hands. It is cool but not sharp, carrying a hint of stone and the faint metallic tang of the well. When you splash it over your face, the effect is immediate and paradoxical. Your eyes open a fraction wider, but the rest of you sinks deeper toward sleep, as if the water has washed the last scraps of adrenaline from behind them. You pour a little over your feet as well, watching the day's dust streak briefly down your skin before disappearing into the basin with a soft swirl. Nearby, someone has set a small lidded jar and a cup on a low table. Steam does not stem from it anymore, but when you lift the lid a crack, a ghost of warmth brushes your fingers, and the scent of something mild and toasted, barley perhaps, or a gentle roasted grain, breathes out. The cup beside it waits, clean and simple. You do not need to be told this is for you. The setup has that unmistakable air of, this will help. Whether you choose to pour or simply take comfort in its presence, the fact that it exists at all says more than any grand gesture. Someone thought past your arrival, past the broth and the gardens, and even the rooftop, all the way to this exact moment when you would be almost too tired to stand, but not yet ready to lie down. Sandals, which have carried you across boards and stones and damp earth, find their place beside the mat without a fuss, toes pointing outward in patient alignment. A folded cloth waits near the pillow, its fibers smelling faintly of sun and soap, offering itself as a buffer between your head and the shared history of the straw beneath. The blanket, when you brush your hand over it, reveals layers, a rougher weave below for structure, and a softer cover on top for indulgence. It is not luxurious in the way glossy advertisements would use the word, but it is deeply, almost stubbornly kind. The neighbors do not hover. They complete small, homely rituals that draw an invisible circle of safety around you, checking that the gate settles properly back into its frame, that the latch rests where it should, adjusting the lantern's wick one last time so it will not flicker indignantly in the middle of the night, moving a stool a few inches so you will not stub your toe during any half-asleep wanderings toward the basin. Each motion is a quiet declaration: you are not just being stored here for morning, you are being looked after. You stand in the mild glow of the courtyard, feeling those declarations settle on you like extra layers of cloth. The city that felt so large and unknowable when you first drifted in on the boat has narrowed, tonight, to this precise square of stone, water, mat, blanket, and lantern. You have been walked, fed, shown the patient crafts that turn time into paper and ink, led past the gardens that will become tomorrow's meals, rescued kindly from a bout of fog-induced confusion, and now, finally, delivered to a doorway that smells and sounds convincingly like yours. The tired, skeptical part of you that always half expects to be an outsider wherever you go can't argue with this arrangement. Luoyang, through the hands and habits of its neighbors, has quietly claimed you for the night. The courtyard is ready to receive the last of your wakefulness, and it does so with almost rude efficiency. The mat waits in its corner like a patient idea, not demanding attention, but certain that sooner or later you will admit defeat and lie down. The lantern, on its hook, throws a modest circle of light that does not try to reach every edge of the square. Shadows gather along the walls and under the eaves, committed to their work without theatrics. The air is cool enough to nip at your skin, yet still holds a faint warmth from bricks and stone that spent the day drinking in sun. You move through the final tasks as if underwater, every motion cushioned and slightly delayed. Cloth rustles as you shake out the blanket and let it fall, its weight settling in a soft wave. A knee tests the mat. It yields just enough, and then stops, holding firm the way a calm friend does when you lean into their shoulder. Your hands smooth the top layer out of habit, chasing creases that would never bother anyone. Somewhere deep inside, the fussy part of you is pleased. Everything else is already halfway to dreaming. You sit on the edge of the mat, feeling cool stone under your feet, and the subtle give of woven fibers beneath you. Above, a narrow strip of sky shows where the roofs do not quite meet. The stars in that strip look oddly domestic from here, like tiny lanterns hung just outside your ceiling. You breathe at a pace that would have annoyed you this morning, but now feels like the only speed that makes sense. Each inhale pulls in the faint smells of the courtyard. Damp stone, clean basin water, the ghost of barley steam, a thin thread of smoke that has surrendered and gone to sleep. The city has not gone silent, it has simply lowered its voice. Somewhere beyond these walls, a ladle taps against the side of a pot as someone rinses away the last traces of soup. The hollow ring arrives faded by distance, as if it has walked a long way and lost interest in being loud. A dog offers a few half-hearted barks from another courtyard, more habit than alarm. The sound bounces once off tile and plaster, then deflates into a yawn you can almost feel. Farther off, the river gives a slow shove against its banks, and the whisper of that movement reaches you as a soft, shifting hush. You lie back at last, the mat accepting you with the resigned generosity of something that has been doing this job longer than you have been alive. The blanket comes over you in small, careful adjustments. A pull here to cover an elbow, a tuck there to persuade a wandering foot into the warm zone. The weight is neither too heavy nor too light. It presses you gently toward the mat without pinning you down. Your body, which has spent years believing that collapse is the only way to stop, is learning tonight what it feels like to land instead. Muscles report in with news of their surrender. Shoulders drop and stay. The muscles behind your neck, which have been auditioning for the role of piano wire all day, finally remember they are made of something softer. Your jaw, that overachieving hinge that normally clenches through emails and traffic and small talk, slackens just enough to admit there is nothing left to hold. Thoughts that earlier marched in formation, shouting lists and deadlines, now drift past in loose, sleepy shapes, try to raise a point, forget what it was, and dissolve into fog. You do not chase any of them. Chasing would require speed, and the city has spent all evening teaching you how to misplace that. Sound becomes the last tether. A broom makes one final pass somewhere, the bristles whispering along stone like a soft hush spoken to the ground itself. A frog down near the river offers a short, unimpressive croak, then falls silent. The water's song continues, its current pressing against the banks with quiet insistence, sending up small splashes and gurgles, that the walls blend into a single, steady rumble. The lantern's light sinks to the edge of your perception, a warm blur on low. Little by little, the intervals between distant sounds stretch wider. Your breathing slides into those spaces, long and even, until somewhere between one exhale and the next, you drift over an invisible threshold, hovering in the middle region where the body finally believes that being still is not a failure, but a skill, and you, folded safely into this mist-soft city, are already more asleep than awake. Morning arrives so quietly that at first you do not notice it is there. It slips in as a coolness along your cheek, a slight brightening behind your closed eyelids, a tiny change in the tone of the river's distant murmur. The blanket still holds you, the mat still cradles the shape of your bones, but the air above your face has shifted. It no longer smells only of damp stone and last night's smoke. It carries a thin thread of something fresher, like water that has just met light. You hover in that soft in-between where dreams have not fully let go and the world has not fully claimed you. For a few slow breaths, the courtyard sounds exactly like your drifting thoughts, empty and full at once, nothing distinct, everything possible. Then a small familiar sequence of noises begins to separate itself from the hum. A basin receives water in slow, careful pours. Cloth moves against cloth. Sandals brush lightly over stone. None of it is urgent. If you chose to sink back into sleep, the city would forgive you. But the day outside is still more night than daylight, and it is offering something you have not yet seen. You open your eyes to a softer version of the courtyard. The lantern's flame has been pinched out, leaving only a faint wisp of cooled smoke curling upward from its wick. Above, the slice of sky visible between roofs has paled from ink to watered silk, a color that does not yet commit to blue. The first suggestion of birds arrives as a hesitant note, then another, like someone clearing their throat before a song. A neighbor moves quietly near the basin, their silhouette spare and unhurried, the kind of presence that belongs so thoroughly to a place that it does not startle you at all. You sit up, the blanket sliding from your shoulders in a soft folding sound. The stone under your bare feet is cool and slightly damp, a reminder that the mist has not entirely abandoned the city. Muscles protest for a moment, surprised to be summoned so soon, then decide that this is an acceptable compromise between more sleep and the curiosity tugging you toward the gate. Last night's heaviness has melted into something looser. Your body feels not fully rested, perhaps, but differently tired, as if the weariness has been arranged more neatly instead of left in tangled piles. By the basin, clear water waits. You splash your face and neck, the cold nudge sharpening your awareness without dragging you out of calm. The reflection that briefly appears in the surface is blurry, framed by the pale courtyard and the still shadowed walls, then breaks into ripples and disappears. A folded cloth touches your hands, accepting the stray drops. Someone sets a small warmed cup near you with the same understated care that arranged the barley drink last night. The liquid inside is simple and mild, just warm enough to remind your insides that morning is a real thing. Sandals find your feet again, their straps familiar now against your skin. The gate's latch lifts with a sound you recognize, and the courtyard opens its mouth to the world beyond. The neighbors, some of the same faces that led you through mist and lantern circles only hours ago, stand ready in the gray-blue light, lanterns mostly extinguished, their hands empty or carrying only small bundles. Their posture carries no ceremony, just that same steady hospitality. It is early. The river is different at this hour, and you are invited. You step back into the lanes. In this almost dawn, the city feels like it has turned its pillow and found the cooler side. The air is crisper, the mist finer. It clings close to the ground in long, low bands, turning alleys into liquid corridors of pale gray. The stones underfoot gleam in places where night dew has settled, making each step a quiet suggestion rather than a firm stamp. Doors remain closed for the most part, but a few have been cracked open to admit the day's first errands. From one, a thin column of smoke rises as someone coaxes a stove back to life. From another, the faint clatter of bowls being set out reaches you in broken fragments. The route toward the river feels shorter than it did in the opposite direction, perhaps because your body remembers it now, or perhaps because the city has decided to tilt itself helpfully. Courtyards slide past, their wells still dark and waiting. The street of brushes and paper is quieter than ever. Tools resting, fibers absorbing dawn. The kitchens exhale only the barest traces of heat. Their real work lies an hour or two ahead. You pass through this resting machinery of daily life as if walking through the backstage of a theater just before the first lamps are lit. Nothing has started yet, but everything is ready. Gradually, the scent of damp earth and water grows stronger, replacing the enclosed scents of stone and smoke. The path widens. Fences reappear briefly, showing the gardens as they receive their first light. Leaves darken at their edges, lined with beads of dew that catch the sky's pale brightness. Beyond them, willows and reeds begin to separate themselves from the mist, their outlines sharpening one slow degree at a time. The sound of the Luo River rises from a background murmur into a distinct layered presence, the broad, steady rush of current in the middle, the softer lap against the banks, the hollow, irregular knock of driftwood against stone. When you reach the riverfront, the scene you find is both familiar and entirely new. The wharf where you arrived last night has been stripped of most of its lanterns. Only a few remain, their weak flames surrendering to the growing light. The wooden planks, so dark and secretive under moon and lamplight, now show their grain and scars, long pale scratches and darker knots that tell the story of cargo and feet. Boats rest at their moorings, some still, some already stirring. Oars are shifted, ropes checked, nets examined with quiet, practiced gestures. Voices exist, low and brief, more function than conversation, drifting across the water and dissolving into mist. The river itself is the main actor. In this almost morning, it looks wider, its surface a muted sheet of pewter, with streaks of lighter silver where the current pulls faster. Mist hangs over it in slow, moving veils, thicker near the opposite bank where trees crouch in indistinct lines. When the first edge of the sun finally considers rising somewhere behind the low hills, the light it sends is hesitant and diffuse, turning the mist above the water into a luminous, shifting curtain. The boats, the steps, the moored ropes, even your own neighbors standing beside you become softer silhouettes against it. You walk along the stone steps, down to where the river's breath is strongest. The cool, moist air clings to your face and hands, seeping into your clothes with a chill that is more invigorating than harsh. The stones at the water's edge are slick and dark, polished by years of waves and bare soles. You stand just high enough to stay dry, just low enough to feel that one more step would put you into the river's patient reach. The sound of the current fills your ears, an unbroken, endlessly varied rush that feels strangely like the inside of your own breathing now. Neighbors gather loosely around you, not to form a procession this time, but to share the view in an easy cluster. Some stand with their hands tucked into sleeves, others with fingers resting on railings or knees. Their faces, lit from above by the slow brightening sky and from below by the reflection of light off the water, carry the same calm, focused expression you saw in their kitchens and workshops. They're watching, not for something specific, but simply being present as the river changes its clothes from night to day. You are part of this small audience now, no longer an outsider, but another pair of eyes folded into the group. You realize, as the mist lifts in thin, reluctant layers, that you belong here for this moment, as completely as anyone else standing on these steps. The city has walked you through its inner rooms, fed you, watched over you while you slept, and invited you to witness how its days begin. The river, with its long memory and its refusal to hurry, has accepted your small weight on its steps without question. You are not of Luoyang, perhaps, not by birth or by habit, but for this slice of time you are of the river, of the mist, of the courtyard with its mat and basin and hanging lantern. The sun finally finds a gap in the low clouds and sends a pale shaft of light down onto the water. It does not blaze, it glows. The surface catches it and breaks it into a slow-moving pattern that glides toward you, past you, then away. You watch it go, feeling the quiet certainty that when you leave this place, it will not empty itself behind you. The river will keep moving, boats will keep tying up at night and slipping away at dawn. Courtyards will continue their slow rituals. Brushes will drink ink, gardens will drink water, fog will rise and fall. This city does not need you to complete its story. Yet it has, in its own unhurried way, written you into a few pages of its long, mist-soft chapter, and that is enough. You stand there, as the day brightens, breathing river air and morning mist, knowing that when you close your eyes again, whether here or somewhere else, Luoyang will be waiting, a place you can walk back to in memory, through courtyards and kitchens and ink-scented streets, across gardens and rooftops, down to these very steps where the neighbors once more, in every quiet way that matters, led you gently homeward. The river remains, moving at its own pace, carrying the reflection of the waking sky. The city stretches, yawns, and begins its daily work, and you, folded into its rhythm, are free to drift wherever your thoughts choose to go next, knowing that this misty, lantern-lit Luoyang will always be here, unhurried, patient, a soft, enduring place in your mind where you already know the way home. The air around you in this moment after the story softens even further, as if the city itself is telling you that you can finally let go of the last thin threads of wakefulness. The sounds that remain are small and distant, a faint splash, a muttered cluck from some half-awake bird, the low sigh of wind finding its way through leaves and along roofs. The stronger edges of the world blur, like ink stroked gently with water, lines feathering into softness. You feel the weight of your own body becoming pleasantly indistinct, as if each limb has decided to rest a little heavier, sinking into whatever surface supports it. Shoulders grow warm and slack, hands uncurl. Your jaw unhooks itself from the day's grip and drifts into neutrality. Breaths lengthen, so quiet that they seem to happen on their own, like the river's current turning corners you can no longer see. Thoughts, if they still approach at all, arrive slowly, wrapped in cotton, uninterested in making speeches. They float in, show a fragment of rooftop, a lantern, a stone step wet with mist, then dissolve without needing conclusions. The courtyard where you fell asleep, the lane of kitchens, the craft street, the gardens, the rooftop, and these river steps, all of them draw back a little, not vanishing, just moving to the far, gentle edge of your awareness. They become a background pattern, a soft, woven tapestry hanging behind your closed eyes, available whenever you wish to visit again, but not demanding attention now. For this short span of time, there is nothing left to observe or remember. There is only the slow and kindly work of resting. If any last concerns from the waking world try to lift their heads, the mist is waiting for them. It rises quietly from the river of your thoughts, curls around each worry, and smooths the sharpness away until all that is left is the sensation of having once been troubled and now, mercifully, not. The city's calm, the neighbor's unhurried steps, the river's endless flowing all lend their tempo to your heart and lungs, so that even your deepest systems begin to move as slowly and gently as the story you have just traveled through. You can let your awareness drift as it wants to now, whether that means sinking down into unbroken dark or wandering lightly along those quiet Luoyang alleys one last time, the lantern glow fading, the stone cool beneath your feet. Nothing is expected of you. Nothing needs fixing. The river moves, the city breathes, and you are allowed completely and without condition to sleep. End of story. Sweet dreams.